Stephen Jenkinson.
You love Stephen Jenkinson.
I do. I love him. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know how I stumbled upon him or when or who told me about him, but I get such a kick out of him. I think he's so great. I don't know what tradition you call that. I kind of associate him with Robert Bly though. There's like this kind of like the Anglo prophetic tradition, maybe Anglo American prophetic tradition. There's something. Do you recognize that same commonality? I know you read Iron John.
Yeah. There's a little like erudite, crotchety old man
Yeah.
kind of vibe that I really like with both of them, I think.
Okay. Well, I think that's a little broader than what I mean. I mean, there's a certain way of dissecting words.
Hmm. Yeah, the focus on etymology, like the constant like going back to the etymology for sure.
And then I think also he uses I always attribute this to him, but this sort of mythic poetic and the application of the mythic poetic and the exploration of it, where we fit into it, how we use it as an orientation.
Yeah, he did use those words, and you use those words. I'm like a little not quite sure what you both mean by those words. I mean, I like those words.
Any,
They're
they're
great
good
words.
words.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, you could probably tell us where they come from, I'm sure, if we asked him
yeah.
originally. Um, where do you come from? Where are you from?
So I wanted to say one thing about the
Okay.
podcast. So you recommended a podcast, an interview with him that I listened to a while ago, and then I saw his performance a couple weeks ago, which is a ceremony, as he said in the interview, and I really I think there's a big difference between a performance and a ceremony, and it's really beautiful how he does that ceremony. In terms of his intention and his how seriously he takes it, and then there's some commonality, and then I had this interview with him. So these are kind of three experiences I've had with this gentleman. There's something in there that I want to share with you, and I'm curious you can maybe help me understand it. I feel like sometimes the way he talks, it's like it doesn't quite make sense to me in terms of like the semantics, but it's almost like he's drilling a poetic hole that's going past my mind and somewhere like deeper into my emotion, and it's really landing there, and I can kind of like feel the import of it in my body, even though like my mind is probably like, yeah, what are you talking about, dude?
Yeah. Well, I think that maybe by way of also an exploration of what we might mean by the mythic poetic. That
Yeah,
that
is
could be
that
a
is
good
that what you mean? Is that what that is?
maybe because it's kind of sneaks one by the goalie of your reason.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think mythology and poetry does the same thing.
Yeah, which is why I love it.
And because you do love both of those things, you
Oh my
love
God,
poetry,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
But you also have this thing that you're also a very rational human being. You know,
Yeah,
you're you're,
oh,
you're a
hey,
mathematician.
I was
You're a
trained that way.
mathematician. Yeah, it's not my fault.
Hey, I went to school.
Yeah,
They trained me.
yeah. Well, I think that's part of it. I think that's the ploy. I think that's the gig. I think that's his gig. You know, he's not a pundit. We're pundits, kind of. He's not.
I'm
He's
not a
not a life
pundit.
coach. Okay, okay. I don't mean to just sling mud at you right there. But we have a podcast. He doesn't have podcasts. He just is like on podcasts, right? But it's like he doesn't. I think here the paradox with this guy is that he doesn't necessarily have a platform, right? He doesn't have an agenda per se, but it's a little bit of a paradox. You kind of caught him on it. You're like, okay, well then what are you on tour for? Or why spend so much time putting this message out there if there's no agenda?
Yeah, no, I think he has an agenda.
Yeah, and what do you suppose that is?
I think he's inviting us to examine these questions that he brought up. So like the whole thing with growth, my whole like inability to understand what he was saying about growth. I think that's part of his agenda, is to help people like me understand what he was trying to say, which I still don't know what it was. But I think that's part of it, And I didn't learn it, Like I learned a lot in that hour with him. The thing about growth, it's still left on the shelf for me to learn. Like I'm gonna go back and try and learn that again.
Yeah, maybe we can interrogate it a little bit today in this conversation. I don't know that I have any clearer of an understanding, but my ears are open You know, I think that this idea of citizenship in troubling times, I've heard him say this several times. I really love it. It's like, what do we owe ourselves? What do we owe each other? What do we owe our place? You know, what do we owe place? What do we owe this planet? And I think it's interesting because like this idea of growth, where he's like really a stick in the mud about it. And for you, I know you as I know like the intention of growth there is you're talking about deepening, clarifying what's meaningful to someone. And it's not like he hasn't experienced what we would, I think I felt you kind of leaning into him like that. I was like, well, what have you been doing all these years? Clearly you've grown in this path, right? But he every turn he kind of like rebuff you, uh, and really took issue with this concept. And my ears are open to that, you know. This other gentleman, Alonso Del Rio, who like I admire his music and his writings, he also says this. He also says this is like the idea of growth is kind of delusional, that we need to go the other direction. That's what he always says. We want to go up, we need to go down first and go in and go down and become more simple and more honest. And I think that he takes issue with this idea of growth as kind of the aggrandizement of the individual. And even if it's an internal goal, like of enlightenment, it's just one more aggrandized individual. And he's kind of tracing the effects of that. That's how I understand it. Um, and the effects on this place, right? What I didn't realize is how his work is so aimed at white men.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Did you pick that up in this interview? Like he really has
totally, dude. Yeah.
yeah, he has a sense of purpose. I was just talking to someone that a friend of ours, Ken, saying I was about to record this with you, and I was trying to explain that to him. It doesn't sound good when you say that out loud. Like if you just say like this is a work that I'm offering for white men, it's not something people would think is a good thing necessarily, right? Rings all kinds of bells of like maybe white supremacy or the white power or whatever. But
Oh, really?
well, for me,
No, I'm,
I
I'm
think
just like culturally tone deaf, man. So help me out here.
well, okay, when I said it to him, when I said it to Ken, he was like, "Whoa." I was like, "No, but here's the catch. It's like this orphan wisdom idea is actually bringing accountability to this legacy, right? And it's connecting these dots in a way that repairs the past, in a way, not in a way that, like proclaims some type of superiority or privilege, but it's actually giving a pathway to repair that is neither disavowal of the past, nor is it this sort of self-loathing prostration,
Yeah. Nor denial.
nor denial. That was interesting to me. It was really interesting. This is why I asked you where you're from, right? Because that's in recent. Maybe we unpack that a little bit. Let's unpack that a little bit, actually, first. Okay, so you're from Squim,
Yeah.
Washington.
Yeah.
Yeah, but when you tell people that, there's sometimes a little bit of a hiccup in the conversation.
Oh yeah.
Why?
I mean, because I'm
What?
my,
'Cause
my
why?
my family's from India, so I look like a brown dude from India. I mean,
You're brown dude from
I
India.
am a brown dude from India, and yeah, and which is funny because in the interview, Stephen Jenkinson he says a lot like people who look like me. He says that a lot,
Yeah.
and it's like I'm like now I have to introduce it with a description of what he looks like, and it's pretty funny because he's an old white dude, sure,
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
with a nice beard,
Yeah.
but
And
his
great style.
his whole look is, I mean, he's got
so
this like
handsome.
long hat, like
Epic.
flat brimmed hat, and then he's
Yeah.
got this like intense poncho, and then he's got this, I think it's like a clay cup with skulls on it, like little sculptures, skulls all over it. And that,
Yeah.
so when he says people who look like me, like I'm like,
I've never seen anyone that looks like that.
yeah. But yeah, so going to the where you're from thing, people will often ask me, but like, okay, you're from Squim, but
Where are you really from?
where you really from?
Yeah. And it's annoying. At the minimum, it's annoying.
Honestly, it really depends on the context. Like if I'm in Squim, my little small hometown, and someone asks me that, it's annoying.
Right. Because you're like the mayor of Squim.
I'm not the mayor of Squim.
Not the official.
But,
I mean,
but you know
not
what? Maybe I
official,
am.
but
Maybe I am like the mayor of Squim. I mean, that's true.
yeah,
I'm not the mayor of Squim.
you're mayor-ish. You're mayor-esque.
Yeah.
But to me, that was a funny moment in the interview. It seemed to kind of reverse that dynamic, or not reverse it, but it happened kind of in a different way, where he goes, "We don't belong here," which isn't the same as saying we shouldn't be here.
Yeah, and it's a fine distinction, as I learned from the interview with Fighting Woman.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
Because she was basically telling me, she's like, "You're not from here," which I heard as you don't belong here, and you shouldn't be here, which is not what she meant.
Yeah, yeah. Right. It is a fine distinction. It's an important distinction, too. Because the shouldn't be here doesn't really have a foothold in reality, because here we are. And now what to do, and how to reckon with history, how to reckon with our past, and reckon with this moment. More to the point, and I think that's what he's after. So he presents this whole thing, and then you just accept it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah.
That's
yeah,
my role. Yeah.
That's what, yeah. I accept it. And you apply it to yourself. And I think it kind of throws it back. It's like, yeah, but wait, but you're not white. But yes, you're not from here. But yes, you're an immigrant. But okay. But then he has to kind of go with you on that. Right. And you're like, well, yeah, I went back to India. And what would have happened if I went to China? And I really loved this little segment of the discussion.
Yeah, me too.
I really cherished it. And I thought, this is, you really got to his, what did he call himself? An accidental animist, or somehow something like this. But it really got to the marrow of his animism. Is when he said, yeah, it might have been the same, might have worked out the same for you, but not for your ancestors.
And that's exactly what I'm talking about. There's so much in that moment for me. So one is this experience of fathering that I really felt like in that moment, he was really gently, but really firmly showing me something. That's something I should have known. You know, like I had that whole thing about India versus China, and it was really just about me. And he was really gently like being like, just kind of like pushing my chin up and be like, well, just like look around, dude. It's not fucking just about you, you know? So I really appreciate that. And I felt a lot of love and care in that moment. And then it got back to the thing that I mentioned before, where it doesn't really make sense to me at all as a rational Stanford math dude that it's like, well, that it matters for your ancestors. I mean, there's no like those people are dead, you know. It's just it doesn't make sense. But it hit me like a hammer, you know, like a sledgehammer, and then so it does matter to some other part of me, and it really struck me as so true.
Yeah, and I think we could actually just stay with that probably, and kind of expand or stretch ourselves into that insight or that examination right there, because to me that would be maybe an inroad to understanding his perspective on growth, right? And that it wouldn't, the them there is not just the dead people in your on your family tree, but actually the further we expanded it would really look at everything in our ecosystem, and everything we touch, everything this wake of consequences we leave behind us, everything that we touch. And then if we kind of turn our perspective that way, and then think about what you just said, so you entered that exchange with him in that moment, thinking it's the same for me on the balance sheet. The outcome there for me was the same level of growth. But if he's doing a different calculus, then it does make that idea of growth a little irrelevant, because he's really thinking more kind of the ecology of not just this moment, but like you said, everything leading up to this moment, the past, or what he said, that this moment is the clearinghouse of the past. What I've received from him, just listening to and it's only through his books. I've never even seen, you're ahead of me. I've never seen him live. I've only heard his talks recorded and interacted with his books and things like that. And there's of course the film, Grief Walk. So I'm got a little jealous, obviously, but the main thing I really take from him is this encounter, and I think the way it's conveyed is in grief. Like that's his background, is in the encounter with death and grief. I had some experience with grief recently, and my big takeaway from that was how you cannot negotiate with it. It will not be negotiated with. It is happening on its terms and on its timeline. And that's the type of that's where I see he's not going to budge, because in conveying that message, there's no budging. It's a reckoning. And this thing about like kind of crisis and regrets being the places where we finally have no recourse but to be honest. There's just no more. There's nothing else to add. There's just like no more aspiration. You just come to the end. And it's like Rick Jarrow says about like this too. It's like you go to the bottom of it. You go right to the bottom of it. And there's no negotiating. You have to encounter it fully. Man, that to me is very beautiful. That to me really, it goes beyond just growth or self-improvement. You use this word a lot, and I wonder if this was the part of you that's being spoken to, is when you talk about interbeing. And you said it recently to me, and it just smacked me in the face. It just happened in a moment where I was just so open to receive that phrase and what it might imply. But to enter that space of interbeing, it's gated. We don't get to bring in all our kind of accoutrement, maybe all our different ideas and personalities, and this aggrandizement. Maybe that's what he's getting at. It's kind of gated, and these gatekeepers traditionally, this idea of grief and mystery, and we just enter into those states naked.
Yeah, and that's where I want to say that we're saying the same thing. Like when I'm talking about growth, like ultimately what growth is for me is expanding the notion of the self to include all that is. So in like the kind of the ancient Indian notion of Bhagwan, of the divine, is the one without a second. The idea that self is so big, there's nothing that it does not include.
What? It's non-dual. Is that what you're saying? This one.
Yeah. So the self is so big that there's not that narrowness has been left behind. So it's including everything he's talking about, the ancestors and the other beings and the trees and the plants and the mushrooms, the root hairs, all of it. But there's another point there with grief, which to me, the way you said it, I kind of got this realization maybe for the first time that the whole like rational worldview that I've definitely been really steeped in, and I think many of us are really steeped in, it has a sort of like armor to it, kind of an imperviousness and an arrogance. It really just thinks, the magical worldview is just bullshit. It's like a little judgy. But this grief thing, I think, is a real kink in the armor. Like just the way you said it, you can't. It happens to the most rational people, and what they or we tend to do is just total denial. Like that's our only way of dealing with it, and it's just really bad. It's like clearly a really bad strategy, and it just ends up not serving the people who attempt that. And there's just there's not a good rational way of dealing with grief, and the rational worldview it has a lot to be proud of. There most of the domains, maybe it's like, yeah, I'm the shit, I'm better, and it thinks that about all the domains, right? But this is one where it's clearly like it has no clue. So it's a nice thing for people in the kind of more in the poetic world to focus on, to be like, all right, we'll try this. And it's impossible, like imagining someone listening to this who hasn't had that experience of just like profound destabilizing loss. Just like this will just be gibberish, right?
Right, but they don't have to worry because it's right around the corner. That's the thing.
Yeah.
It's just inescapable.
Yeah.
It's baked in. And, and he says too, the regrets, or, I would put like, certain events of humiliation, or, it's not just death, but death is the one that's just there, right? Just total. And of course, now the rationalists that they're going to take, this is their final frontier.
Oh yeah. They're super intent, right? Like
that's it. Because that's the one thing that is That's their kinky with the kink in the armor. Yeah, that's kinky. That's totally because there's nowhere to hide from death at this point, and it's the thing that unravels that worldview. It unravels rationalism. Yeah, I agree. I agree with you. I think this is maybe a way to at least kind of land the growth thing or land the mythic poetic thing in your conversation. And if I had to say an agenda or pin him down to something, maybe he wouldn't be so happy with me for doing it. But it does seem to be that this idea of grief literacy, I think I've heard him use that term, that we're grief illiterate. And we've just shoved it, we've actually removed it physically, you know, where we can. It's just actually remove ourselves from it and put our parents in the homes, let them die there and put death somewhere else, remove ourselves, in all ways. It's almost, it's like our waste, our human waste is like, just flush it, get rid of it. We don't want to look at it. Maybe you can help me think right now. I mean, what do we have to gain? I guess if that's what's missing from that worldview, what do you think, or what do you think Stephen Jenkinson, maybe he said it in the interview, of course, then we were back to growth and gain and increase. Of course, he would just shoot that one down. Right. But there's like, okay, so why though? But why? And then I was thinking this too when you're talking to him. Obviously, he's very connected to a why because he's working his ass off. It's not like he's working. This guy, however old he is, he's on tour. So there's that. And on his break from the tour, he goes back and works around the clock, slaughtering and butchering animals on the farm. And the other thing is that it seems like things are going well. If he has all these animals to slaughter, he's got this great this great project. He's so well received by so many people. He's called to speak and perform everywhere. His books have done well. So he's out there and he's expansively out there. So I wonder. I don't. Maybe not gain. Obviously, he would hate that. But what?
So here's the thing. This is what we got to at the end of the podcast, or at the end of the interview, or near the end. It's really clear to me that even though he would reject a lot of our vocabulary or narrative around vision and purpose, like I didn't even get into the vision stuff with him.
Thank God you didn't tell me you're a life coach. Jesus Christ, it's bad enough you're a podcaster, podcasting life coach. That's the postmodern double threat.
But it's just so clear that he's living his purpose, right? Like it's so clear. He's just so connected. And maybe he won't express it in the way that like the rational linear mind wants to hear it. But it's just, he doesn't have to. Like it's just so clear. That's what he's emanating with every, in his presence, and even in our interview together. He's just like, he's pulsing with it.
Yeah. He's activated.
Yeah.
It's fun. People he meets. So I mean, it's like really whatever he calls it.
Yeah.
I'm sure this is like this is what we would hope for someone.
Yes.
That we're working with.
Yes.
That they discover some path like this.
Yes. Which is why I think it's a great interview. Because that's what I want on the show, is to have examples of that to various degrees. And he's just like a fantastic example.
So I ask you again, so why do you suppose that we should become grief literate or approach these gatekeepers of interbeing? And, what possible seduction does it hold, or how do we get anyone to even consider this as a probability in their life? Because it's not convenient and it's not intuitive, and nothing around us predicts it or makes it easy. You really have to go out of your way, right? Like I love what you guys said. He really slapped you around. He had no idea. Jasmine was in the hospital, a year ago. And he says, you only do this when your daughter's in the hospital. And I visually see you like, whoo, And of course, in those moments, like not everyone has a daughter that, or whatever, but everyone has like some way they can relate to that encounter where it's like, oh God, I'll give up coffee. I will go as far I will give up coffee, God. I'm telling you right now. And then, then the thing doesn't happen. And the next morning you're in line for your triple latte. It's like, yeah, okay. Well, thank God. Thank you, God. But thank you, caffeine too. Why bother to maintain that or entertain that?
Yeah, I can think of two immediately. I can think of two answers. One is the narrow answer, and one is the expansive answer. And the narrow answer is it's risk mitigation. Like it's like that event, which we consider to be so unfortunate and unforeseen, though it's destined to reach us, the trauma and death and being totally thrown off of our rocker and our sense of bearing by these things. It's just, we're all going to have that multiple times in our lives, and you can be prepared. Like the grief literacy is being prepared, so it's gonna help you not just become a total mess and shit show when that happens. That's like the narrow, gimme, like self-concerned answer.
Sure. I'm sure Stephen would have words about that. Okay, so what's the more expensive answer?
And for me, personally, like I'm interested in unity. I'm interested in connection. I'm interested in like wholeness outside of this one being. It's empathy. It's the ultimate. It's the ultimate commonality that we have with all living beings.
Yeah, because I wonder if the narrow answer is even an answer, because I think Stephen would like take just kind of like probably his hard stance with it right away, anyways, because it's like whatever, self serving. But also, I wonder if it's even possible, because part of this thing that we're talking about is the falling apart. So there's no preparing for it. It's not like a readiness camp where I do it and then I'm better at it. Is that actually that falling apart is the unnegotiable, the non-negotiable aspect of it, and that is the encounter. What does he say? It's like no opinions are valid there. It's like I think we all come to it the same. That's an interesting notion. I don't know. I don't even know if I believe that, but it's something to consider, right? We all come to it, no matter what we've done to prepare ourselves, all our training. We come to this encounter where there's no negotiation, none of our stripes, none of our medals, none of our attainments or meditation practice, and doesn't matter. You sat 14 Vipassanas, this guy sat 0. You come to it the same, and it's a total deconstruction, falling apart, going to the very bottom of who you are, and there you are.
I have to say, I mean, I want to believe. I'm not sure if I do believe. I think I do believe that the difference could be that in the middle of that lostness, in the middle of that crisis, you could have some knowing that this too will pass, and that knowing can only come from practice of having been that lost and having been found. And I'm thinking of other kinds of self-dissolving experiences that I've had where the only thing that kept me going was knowing that it was going to pass. And the moments where I forgot that I knew it was going to pass, things became really dark and deep. And I wonder if it's similar.
I wonder too. And you convinced me there. I think that's true. And then I also think then you become a source of stability for your family or your community, right? You're able to offer that. And maybe this is what he did. Like this is, one could imagine, like all his 20 years in death work kind of gave him a certain resiliency or a certain literacy. And that's actually the platform or the ground that he's standing on and offering when he's on stage or when he's leading a ceremony like that. He's drawing from those resources. Some resource does develop there. I believe that with you. There was a line in there I think worth mentioning. We could probably just go in circles here for a while, because I think this is really it's a beautiful dialogue to have, and I don't know that there's an end to it, right? Because it's not a rational dialogue. It's poetic. You said something to him. I don't think you've ever said it on this podcast. I don't recall you ever saying it to me, but you said we're saying all the time whatever we think we're talking about. We're just always singing the song of ourself. I thought, God damn, that was beautiful, man. That was so poetic. And what do you think his song is?
To me, what I heard is something about words you just used, maybe solidity, being centered. It's vulnerability, like openness to the mystery, openness to being hurt. And it's that kind of crotchety, tight ass stuff around language that I really love. I had some professors like that I just love that, the precision around language. It's just it's rare, and I appreciate it. Yeah, I think it's some combination of that, and then it's hard. It didn't come across in the show, but I think we're gonna play some of it, or we will have at this point. By the time this is being aired, we will have integrated some of the music. Like, they sent me clips of the music that we can put in the show, and I think that's a big part of it as well for him. Some combination of those elements is what I would come up with.
His song actually contains some music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, as you were saying that, and thinking again about this kind of, maybe we call it the art of falling apart. And the various places that are still available to do that. And I think Stephen's hinting at any one of us comes from a lineage, and that lineage has options for us to do that if we go back and investigate it, and for us to join and participate in that. It's actually a great resource for us to then fall apart artfully in our everyday, and allow ourselves to sort of be deconstructed or humbled in the face of these greater things, this greater space of ancestry or lineage. And just hearing you say that now, and kind of reflecting on him as a person, this is a yeah, like I feel like I'm painted into a corner with words that I know that you would take issue with. But this is a pathway for us to develop that, maybe that acuity or that sense or that solidity that you're talking about, become a resource in that way. And maybe it's more of a deepening than a gaining or a growing, but deepening into that. And then, what you said, maybe I can revise kind of the pushback that I just offered, where as we practice this, or as we develop in this ability to artfully fall apart, maybe there's also there's less pretense to lose, right? So we're functional in these moments, so much of these moments around death is so just the stupid details of having to go clear out your loved one's house, and make the arrangements, and go sit across the table from some doctor or some medical professional and understand what's being said. And in those moments, we become, if we have the wherewithal, we have the resource to have some solidity in that moment. It's really a pretty big gift to whoever we're with and tied into that moment with. Beautiful. Yeah, thanks for having this conversation. I think I could tell you really showed up for it. It's just like, here I am. I don't get it. I don't understand everything you're saying.
Yeah, it was an honor. It really was an honor.
Cool. All right. Well, and thank you all for joining us for this conversation. As always, we love you. It's true. And we thank you for your attention. Reach out to us if you can find a way, just beneath wherever you're watching this. There's, I'm sure, comments. You can also reach out to the email. Also, the information found beneath this episode. Of course, we're on Twitter, too, under the Aegeus of Saint Elon. You can reach out to us there as well. Thank you all so much. We'll talk to you next time.